What if I told you that some of the most expensive dishes in the world today, lobster tails, caviar, oysters on ice, were once the foods prisoners begged not to eat? It sounds ridiculous, but history is full of ironies. This is the strange story of how prison food became luxury dining. 10. Spam and canned meats. World War II, 1940s. A block of pink, gelatinous meat slides out of its tin with a wet plop. Soldiers grimace. Prisoners roll their eyes. Spam, made by Hormel in 1937, became a wartime staple because it was cheap, long-lasting, and didn't need refrigeration. During World War II, the US shipped over 100 million pounds of spam to soldiers and even allies like the Soviet Union. Prisoners of war and labor camps often received canned meats as their only protein source. To many, it was the flavor of desperation. But here's the twist. In places like Hawaii, South Korea, and the Philippines, spam transformed after the war. Locals, left with surplus cans, turned it into creative recipes. Spam musubi in Hawaii, budae jjigae, army stew, in Korea. Today, Michelin-star chefs have reimagined spam in gourmet dishes. What was once prison and army food now sits proudly on high-end tasting menus. 9th. Crabs. 19th century America. Picture the Chesapeake Bay. Crabs scuttling in the shallows. Back then, crabs were so abundant they were considered garbage food. Enslaved people and the poorest fishermen ate them. In some prisons, they were tossed in as trash fish. Crabs were even ground into fertilizer or fed to livestock. Fishermen complained they were too much trouble to cook. Fast forward to the 20th century. The rise of refrigeration, urban markets, and tourism in Maryland turned crab feasts into a delicacy. Today, Alaskan king crab legs can cost over $100 per plate. A food once seen as lowly has become a centerpiece of luxury buffets. 8. Snails. Escargot. Ancient Rome, 1st century C.E. Snails were everywhere, crawling through vineyards, gardens, and fields. Romans considered them cheap, easy protein. Peasants and prisoners boiled them in simple stews. In France, rural farmers ate snails to survive hard winters. They were free, abundant, and nobody envied the people eating them. But in the 19th century, French chefs reinvented snails as escargot, cooked in garlic butter, parsley, and wine, presented elegantly in porcelain trays. Today, they're a symbol of French luxury cuisine. Imagine telling a Roman prisoner that people would one day pay $30 for 6 snails. 7. Mussels. Victorian England, mid-1800s. Oysters were still cheap and plentiful, but mussels? They were considered the poor man's shellfish. Cheap, rubbery, and often linked to food poisoning, they were fed to prisoners and the coastal poor. In Belgium and northern France, mussels began to climb in reputation when paired with fries, moules frites, now a beloved national dish. Chefs in Parisian brasseries elevated mussels by steaming them in white wine, cream, and herbs. What was once the cheapest protein in the bay now stars in refined seafood platters. A steaming pot of mussels with wine and crusty bread can cost $40 plus in a modern brasserie. 6. Foie gras Egypt, 2500 BCE. Wall paintings show workers force-feeding geese to fatten their livers. At first it was survival food. Fattened liver stored calories. Roman armies later adopted the practice, but for centuries goose liver was rustic, eaten by peasants across rural Europe. Farmers fattened geese not for luxury, but for sustenance, using every part of the animal. It wasn't until French haute cuisine in the 18th century that foie gras became a delicacy. By the 19th century, chefs in Strasbourg and Paris refined it into pâtés and terrines. Today, foie gras is banned in some countries for ethical reasons, but in others, it's a prized luxury dish that can sell for $100 a plate. 5. Potatoes. France, 1748. Potatoes were once banned in France, considered fit only for livestock. They were thought to cause leprosy, laziness, and even witchcraft. Farmers refused to grow them. When famine struck, potatoes were forced onto prisoners and the poor as survival food. But French pharmacist Antoine-Augustin Parmentier changed everything. After being imprisoned during the 7 Years' War, he ate potatoes to survive. When he returned to France, he promoted them as nutritious, even convincing King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette to wear potato flowers as fashion statements. Within decades, potatoes went from prison gruel to staple crop, saving Europe from famine. Today, luxury chefs transform them into delicate gnocchi, truffle mashed potatoes, and even caviar-topped potato blinis. 4. Sushi, narazushi. Japan, 8th century. The earliest sushi wasn't beautiful rolls or delicate nigiri. It was narazushi, fermented fish preserved in rice. It smelled pungent, tasted sour, and was eaten by peasants and prisoners as a way to survive. By the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, sushi evolved into fresh fish on vinegared rice, a quick, cheap street food for Tokyo workers. It was the fast food of its day, eaten by hand at stalls. Fast forward to the 20th century. Sushi spread worldwide, transforming into a symbol of refinement. Today, a single piece of Toro sushi at Tokyo's Sukiyabashi Jiro can cost $30 to $40, and omakase menus reach into the hundreds. 3. Caviar, Russia, 1800s. The Volga River teemed with sturgeon. Their roe, what we call caviar, was so plentiful it was handed out to peasants, soldiers, and even prisoners. In America, taverns served it free as a salty snack, just like peanuts. But by the late 19th century, overfishing drove sturgeon to scarcity. Scarcity, of course, creates luxury. Russian tsars and European aristocrats adopted caviar as a delicacy. Today, beluga caviar sells for up to $10,000 per kilo. What was once poor man's fish eggs has become one of the most expensive foods in the world. Second, Oysters, London, 18th century. Walk along the Thames and you'd see oyster shells piled in heaps. Oysters were so abundant they cost less than bread. They were fed to servants, sailors, and even prisoners. In New York, oyster carts lined the streets. Workers grabbed oysters by the dozen for a penny. They were seen as cheap fuel, not fine dining. But by the late 19th century, over-harvesting and pollution decimated oyster beds. Suddenly they became scarce, and scarcity breeds status. Today, oysters are paired with champagne, sold for $3 to $5 each, and symbolized as aphrodisiac luxury. 1. Lobster, colonial America, 1700s. Imagine being sentenced to hard labor, and your punishment meal is lobster. No, really. Lobster was so abundant in New England that it washed up on beaches in piles 2 feet high. Colonists called them cockroaches of the sea. Prisoners, servants, and indentured workers revolted against lobster meals, demanding they not be forced to eat it more than twice a week. Lobster was fertilizer, fish bait, and the butt of culinary jokes. But by the 19th century, railroads served lobster in dining cars, marketing it as exotic seafood. Its image flipped. By the 20th century, lobster was firmly entrenched as a luxury, the red shell symbol of fine dining. Today, a lobster dinner can run $50 to $100, a far cry from the prison plate it once was. So the next time you're eating luxury food, remember, it might have once been punishment food.